Good morning. If you don't recognize, I'm Joseph, that's Jasmine.
Hi.
This will be, of course, a serious talk. We're psychologists and we're Swiss. There'll be no laughing here. Why are we doing this talk? It's quite simply what Ralph said. It's about science and about the problems that the Agile community has with science. So, I like this quote from two folks. It says, "No one in their right mind would attempt surgery without years of study and practice." There are two things that everyone thinks they're born as experts on: sex and talking about films. We have the feeling that talking about psychology is about the same thing. There are too many people who read something in some kind of popular journal, think they're experts about it, and then go and talk at conferences about it. They don't know enough about it, and they pass on this lack of knowledge then to others. And we found an interesting and disturbing trend that in order to get your talk accepted at a conference, all you need to do is put the words psycho, neuro, or cognitive in the title of your talk, and you have a good chance of getting accepted. So what we thought we'd do is we actually started this out to figure out what we were going to talk about. So we came up with the psychoneurocognitive buzzword bingo slam, which we actually did at a conference. We stood up there for 45 minutes and had people throw words at us, and we would tell them what they actually meant.
It was challenging and fun.
Yeah, it was really fun. And these are actually some of the words we came up with. You probably recognize most of these from somebody's talk. Cognitive bias, empathy, what is a team? 7 plus minus 2 is always a favorite. MBTI, talkment, resilience, emotional intelligence, inclusiveness, neurodiversity, leaders, and psychopaths, hypersensitive people, Dunning-Kruger, and the imposter syndrome. We actually got through almost all of them in 45 minutes. But then we decided it would be a good idea to take two of them that are really hot buzzwords right now, also ones that are topics of our research interest, and go a little bit more in depth about that to show what professionals in this field do when they research a topic. So the first topic we're going to talk about is psychological safety, where Jasmine just happens to be Germany's leading expert on that. So I'm going to shut up and let her talk.
So that's a great honor. I don't call myself HR coach. That has a reason. I'm not a fully trained coach yet. So I don't feel qualified to call myself an HR coach. But I am a fully qualified psychologist. So I can call myself an HR psychologist. That's what I am. And I wanted to start that talk with a question of how many of you happened to ever be part of an awesome team? And then being a psychologist, I started having a problem with that question. Because what is an awesome team? How can I qualify awesome? How can I measure awesomeness in a team? And what's a team anyway? So I decided to not start that talk with that question. I started the talk with a little story about myself. So, hi, Jasmine. And my experience with teams started very, very early in my education. So I was in a quite modern school, and we used to do a lot of teamwork, and people would pair us up, or our teacher would pair us up and give us team assignments or group assignments, and we had to do them. And what I learned about teamwork is that it could go two ways. Either I was the strongest link on the team, and I would do most of the work, and then teach my teammates how it's done and what I learned. That was fine for all of us, because I was always very interested in learning, and that was good for me. It was good for my teammates. They didn't have to do any work. Or it could go the other way around, that my teammates didn't want me to do all the work. So we would split up in groups, and we would separate the work into little parts. Everybody would do his little part, and then we would try to combine that in the end. The combination in the end didn't really work for us most times. So if it was rocky and there wasn't a red line, and the team assignment wasn't as good. So if that calls with you, what you experience in the corporate world, it does call with me what I experience when I support teams. I see those two patterns happening all over again in the corporate world. But then I went to university, and as I studied psychology, we had one lecture called coaching, where we actually learned some coaching skills, and we had to coach each other. And I was in a group with Bronson and Daniel. And we would tell each other stories out of our lives, we tell each other problems, and we would coach each other. So that's kind of the thing you do when you study psychology as well, apart from doing the scientific stuff. And Bronson and Daniel and I went on into doing our master, and we formed a study group. And our grades went beyond limit, the three of us. So studying with Bronson and Daniel actually made me a way better student than I was before. And also the team assignments I was able to do with Bronson and Daniel were great. We were able to hand in some team assignments, and they were great because we really worked as a team. The work we did, the three of us, was better than the work any individual of us could do. So that was the first time when I felt what teamwork was really about, without anyone teaching me what teamwork was about. So my next thought was, well, is teamwork just something that happens by chance? Because our education system and also the corporate world seems to think that if you put a bunch of people into a group and call them a team, teamwork will happen. Maybe we do a team building event as well in the beginning, and then they're a team. They are going to do great teamwork. But that's not the case. Teamwork has to be learned. So I went on in my research and thought, okay, if teamwork doesn't happen by chance, there has to be something that we can learn in order to be a good team. And I researched what a team is. So a bunch of people happening to work together is not a team. There are definitions of what a team is, and a team is interdependent. So if the group you're working with isn't interdependent, it's not a team. A team has a common goal or a common purpose, and that's something we can work on. So do all of us really have the same goal? Do we have a common purpose together, or don't we? And I love the last definition. Teamwork is a cooperative process that allows ordinary people to do extraordinary things. So now we have a definition of a team. But still, when I was in my professional work life, I still didn't really figure out what's the difference between those good teams and those great teams. Because I did, in the corporate world, I did experience great teams. And I didn't experience good teams. And I heard about Google's Aristotle's project. Probably some of you know about that as well. And the project tells us that psychological safety is one of the key factors that makes a good team going from good to great. So I thought, well, if Google found that out, it must have been researched before, and it has been researched before. The mom of modern psychological safety is Amy Edmondson. Amy Edmondson studied medical teams in the beginning and found out that a good medical team has psychological safety as a team norm. But psychological safety goes way back. It has been discovered about 60 years ago when Shine and Benny studied what helps people in change processes, what helps them to actually engage in those change processes. So that's where psychological safety comes from. Now, how it is described in the Google world was kind of fuzzy for me. So I needed some more grip on what is psychological safety really. And I like those two definitions. So psychological safety is a shared team norm that it's okay to take into personal risks. It's a climate that is characterized by trust and a mutual respect for each other. So that is comfortable being oneself. So why is that so important? That sounds kind of, yeah, right, that's logic. But why is it important? Because it's not natural to us. Subconsciously, we always try to protect our self-esteem. So what normally happens when we work in teams where we don't feel safe is that we share the information that all the team has. That will give us a good self-esteem. Because if I share any information that you have, you will not. If I share an information that you don't have, you'll probably be skeptical. You have to think about it. Your body reaction won't be as nice. So if we don't feel safe and we work as a team, the intelligence we have as a team is lower than the intelligence that I have as an individual. If we have psychological safety, we can bring all our skills, all our weakness, and also our strengths, all our thoughts, all our information into that team, and our group intelligence will be a lot higher. So then I went into the Agile world and talked about psychological safety in the Agile world, and psychological safety sounds so nice. It sounds so comfortable. So those are some misconceptions I heard about psychological safety in the Agile world. So there are some teams that heard about psychological safety and then they have to work with other teams together, and they was like, oh no, I can't work with them because I don't feel safe if I have to work with them. That's not safety, that's comfort. I don't feel comfortable if I have to work with other people. Yes, that means we have to establish safety there, but that's not a reason not to work with them. It's also not a team that has no tension. It's rather the opposite. If I have psychological safety, I can have tension as a team and I can support it. It's not a team that drinks a lot of beer after work and has a lot of fun. So the fun factor in a team doesn't describe my psychological safety in a team. I can feel unsafe and still like the people I'm working with. That's totally, that doesn't, that goes together. So now that we know what psychological safety is and what the misconceptions are, I went on and researched and read papers about what are the real impacts of psychological safety. And on an individual level, if it's measured just individual by individuals, it will give myself a feeling of vitality. And that feeling of vitality is a key factor for creativity, which we need in the digital world, which we need if we have to solve complex problems. It will also help me to speak up in voice. And if I speak up in voice, I can learn more as an individual. So it will promote my individual learning. And I will show more engagement. On an organizational level, it's a lot harder to track the impacts of psychological safety because you have a lot more factors that go into the pot. But psychological safety has been proven to mediate the relationship between process innovation and an organizational performance. So it's actually worth paying attention on psychological safety on an organizational level. And one can also prove that it helps with organizational learning, which is really important because we have a lot of knowledge in our organizations that we have to keep in the organization and has to grow. But most of the time, psychological safety is studied on a team level, and that will be the worst slide you'll see ever, because it's full. So it's really impactful, and I'll just pick the things that are most important to me. So if a team has psychological safety, it's able to voice, it's able to speak up. It's also able to go into a problem-solving thinking rather than a problem thinking. So I'm able to see solutions more than I see problems. And as a team, it promotes team learning. So I can learn as a team a lot more. So the retrospectives we're doing every second week will have a lot more impact if I establish psychological safety because we learn as a team. But also teams that have psychological safety, that have that shared norm, are able to accept diversity as a factor that brings them forward, rather than diversity as something we have to do because we have to staff our team with different people. And what's really important for me as well is that psychological safety helps us to buffer that danger that comes when we lose the advantage, when we lose the status that comes with roles. So if we work with Scrum, we have a Scrum team. I'm not the architect anymore. I'm not the business analyst anymore. That gave me some security as a person because it gave me some identity. And I'm losing that. And psychological safety will help me as an individual to buffer that loss that I'm experiencing. I know that's not always the case with people, but I experience a lot of people that felt that loss, and psychological safety will help me immensely there. So now I thought to myself, if psychological safety is so powerful, it has to have a downside as well. Everything has a downside. So there is a downside of psychological safety. There is a dark side. Teams with high level of psychological safety are more likely to engage in unethical behavior. That is seen within the American police. White policemen arresting black people. There is also other biases in there, but amongst that is psychological safety. And it's also proven in research that even a small amount of dishonesty can spread and become a team norm. So that's the downside of psychological safety. If I feel very safe in my group, it might be also very safe to be unethical. But there is research that proves that with ethical leadership and with good social role modeling, I can reduce those effects. So it's just something that I have to be aware of as a team coach or as a team lead or even as a team member. Now, being a former HR girl, my first thought was there has to be a personality trait that is prone to psychological safety. So if I just staff my teams with personalities that feel safer than others, I just don't have to deal with the problem. But there is no correlation between personality traits and psychological safety, except for neuroticism, which is a negative correlation. So if I have a lot of fear, it's harder for me to feel safe. Next thought was, what about organizations? So if I just do an organizational program, then I don't have to deal with all the teams. So I could establish an organizational norm, and then that would be a lot more cost effective. Unfortunately, psychological safety differs within teams in one organization, even if they have a strong organizational culture. So, conclusion, we have to deal with psychological safety on a team level, with each and every team. But how? How do I do that? So the next slides, they're not as scientific as the ones before, because the science is very much in hierarchical teams, and I found it not that useful for my Scrum teams or for an Agile organization that is pretty flat. So those are the hypotheses I drew out of research. Most of it is from Amy Edmondson, but also from the Google, from the Aristotle project and so on. What I do with my teams. The first thing is start measuring. If you're a psychologist, you have access to surveys and questionnaires that you can do with your teams. Teams are most times not very happy when I do questionnaires with them, because they feel on the bench and they feel like they're being on an experiment. So what I do is I make psychological safety a retrospective topic, and I talk about how safe people feel in that team, how safe it is to fail in that team, how safe it is to take an interpersonal risk. And most times I do anonymous votes, so that people don't have to out themselves, because if they don't feel safe, they wouldn't say that they don't feel safe. And what I do as well is I have those cool-off conversation after meetings. So if we have a meeting that was kind of rough and where I felt tension, I approach individuals and I have a cool-off conversation with them. And if they are talking about things they didn't talk in the meeting, if they have information they share with me that they didn't share in the meeting, I know that we have a problem with psychological safety. So those are two things I do, how I can measure psychological safety informally. Second thing is create awareness. And awareness always starts with yourself. So create awareness about your own emotions. Create awareness how you feel in that team. create awareness how we react to that team. Because it's most likely that you are part of the system and you react like the system reacts. So, and create awareness how you communicate. Create awareness how it is if you fail. What happens when you fail? Do you communicate that fail or don't you? So be very aware of yourself. And secondly, create awareness in your team. So there is a nice thing that we do in the Agile world. We do team working agreements. And when I work with new teams and I ask them, do you have a definition of done? Yes, that's the flip chart that's hanging over there. It's like a yellowish thing that is almost falling off the wall. Or maybe it's a page in OneNote or a wiki page somewhere. And then I ask, do you have team agreements? Oh yeah, we did that team agreement on that one team working day. Like, oh yeah, that's not what we do with team agreements. So what I do with team agreements is I revise them, as I do revise the definition of done. Every 2 months, every 3 months. And we talk about it. We talk about our team norms. What is the team norm? That starts with small things. Like one of my teams, it's a team norm that if one team member gets himself a coffee, he asks the others if they want a coffee as well. Within another team, that would be the worst thing ever because everybody is concentrating and in flow. And if I go, hey, do you want a coffee, guys? They're ripped out of the flow and they don't want that. But it's really important to talk about team norms and what are our norms. How do we deal with conflicts? How do we do our code reviews and how do we deal with it if I find something in your code that isn't nice? Do I write it into the tickets? Do I tell you? Do we talk about it? What do we want to do with it? And revise that all the time. And if you have a new team member coming to the team, you have to do new team agreements because that changes your team definition. Third step, be a role model. So model vulnerability, model taking risks, model decision making, model solution focusedness. That goes together with being aware of yourself. And the fourth step comes out of complexity theory. Create a container for your team to have a shared container and a shared context. Create a container where the team can get to know each other. And for the one team that maybe means ordering pizza and beer after work. For the other team that means having breakfast together. And for the third team that means that I do retrospective exercises where they can really get to know each other. Like bio-sharing is one exercise, or there is a really, really great game I discovered at Last Play for Agile called 360 Stories, where the team can share stories together. Stories about their life. So stories how they work as an individual and where they're coming from and where they want to go. So create awareness of the team. And I would like to finish with a citation. It's about emotional intelligence, which has been linked to psychological safety a lot. Because that all sounds very inachievable sometimes. But I love that one. It says that group emotional intelligence is not about the big thing. It's about the small acts. It's not about everybody working all night to get something done. It's about saying thank you for saying so, for doing so. It's about asking the quiet team member what he thinks. It's about acknowledging when harmony isn't there or when there is a false tension in the room. It's about what we do with that, not having it. So now that you worked on the fundament of high performance in team, Joseph will give you some more specifics.
Okay, you remember that one slide of her that she says was the ugliest? You ain't seen nothing yet. This is going to get really bad. We're going to go pretty deep into the science and hopefully coming out of that, give you some ideas of some easy things that you can do with your teams to help make them more intelligent. The concept of intelligence teams, let's do it simply. Oh, that's right. You didn't take that out.
No, but I'm not the hi, I'm Jasmine, and my experience started.
Yeah, okay, that's me at
That's
university.
modeling vulnerability.
Yeah, that's me at university getting hooked up to an EEG. I'd rather not tell you what we were measuring there. Okay, let's get back. Have you ever had the problem that you get a group of really intelligent, really good people together and think this is going to be a great team, and then they act like a bunch of idiots? See, this happens to us regularly. Remember, we're Swiss. Our national football team does this. And it's an interesting question of why does this happen? So let me start out with getting back to the basic question of, well, what do we mean by great? What do we mean by awesome? How do we measure that? How do we scale that? There's a branch of psychology which is known as psychometrics. And what we do in psychometrics is we learn how to measure something which is known as a latent construct. A latent construct is something that's not directly measurable. Your weight is directly measurable. You can step on a scale and you can see how heavy you are. Your age is not directly measurable. Depending on how well I slept at night, I look younger or older when I get up in the morning. There are a number of traits that are not directly measurable. In psychology, we measure things like anxiety or depression. One of the classic latent constructs to measure is intelligence. How do we measure intelligence? Intelligence has many facets, many dimensions. There's verbal expression in intelligence, there's mathematical, there's symbolic intelligence, there's musical intelligence, and all these parts play a role. If we think further, this is a big question that comes in when we start doing things like assessments for agility. What does it mean to be agile? How can you go and look at a team and say, yes, this team is actually agile? Is just seeing them go to a meeting every morning and talking and drinking coffee, meaning this team is agile? And what can we predict from this behavior? What can we predict from this measurement? Another latent construct is psychological safety. How can we measure that? And this is one of the things that I'm doing a lot of work on in terms of my, we both have our masters in psychology. I'm back finishing up my PhD and I'm still trying to talk her to go back to university. So we'll get to that eventually. So there are three major considerations. The dimensionality. As I said, something like age is unidimensional, something like intelligence is multidimensional. There are interesting things of test reliability. If you do the test twice, will you get exactly the same score both times? And validity is a test actually measuring what we think it's measuring. And these are some very interesting thoughts that come in when you start measuring things like intelligence, or once again, like agility, or like psychological safety. And getting to the point of collective intelligence, this is a topic that the first papers on it came out in 2010, where Anita Woolley and her colleagues at Harvard and MIT started researching really good teams, really intelligent teams, and tried to define the concept of intelligence, which is multidimensional for an individual. How would that look over a group? And what are the factors that play into this? And they first thought, okay, we get a bunch of really smart people together and we'll have a really smart team. They found out that the correlation between individual intelligence and group intelligence is very low. What they found out was very high was the correlation between social awareness, social sensitivity and perceptiveness, so empathy, also the equality in turn-taking in the group, the equality of contributing to the conversation, which is a reflection of psychological safety, and also the number of women in the team, which is why I have Jasmine. Now, I'm a lot smarter just because she's here. The gender diversity thing. From the point of view of psychometrics, we have to realize that the number of women in a team is a moderating variable for empathy, because women are, on a whole, empathicer than men are. So how do we go about measuring this? Okay, during the course of this next session, I have to stop for a second for an ethical reason. In the course of the next session, I'll be showing you a couple excerpts from psychological tests and asking you to do that. anytime we do this as psychologists, we have to tell you about something which is known as informed consent. Informed consent means you don't have to do this. There's nothing here that will really get you scared or should be a problem or something, but I'm going to show you stuff from real licensed psychological tests. I'm going to ask you to try them out. Okay? It's your choice to do them or not to do them. It's your choice to do them alone or in a group. It's your choice to tell people about the results or not. It's your choice to stop in the middle or not. I just wanted to make that very clear for you. Okay? Because we want to show you the type of things that we do. As Jasmine said, as psychologists, we're licensed to use certain tools that you aren't. And there are good reasons for that. Has anyone ever seen that video with the 6 college students playing basketball and in the middle a gorilla walks through? That sucks, doesn't it? Back in 2006, I paid $400 for the rights to use that in my training. And now it's up on YouTube. This is what happens when a psychological instrument gets released to the general public. Just think what happens if Wechsler's IQ test will get released to the general public, and how that skews the results. So, what we're going to look at is some of the tests and some of the things that we use, and I'm also going to offer you some alternatives that are not licensed, that are free, that you can use to try out with your teams. So, first, how are we measuring empathy? There are 2 classical tests we use. One is Baron-Cohen's. By the way, this is Simon Baron-Cohen, who's a psychologist in Cambridge, specializes in autism. It's not Sacha Baron-Cohen, who is his cousin, who is a comedian. That's reading the mind in the eyes. And the second is the classical personality analysis test, which is a Neo-FFI from the Cray and Costa. So, what does that look like? Reading the mind in the eyes. Take a look at this gentleman's eyes. Which emotion do you see in here? What do you think? Think about it. Okay, let's take a look at the answer. Panic. This is a classical test for autism. And there is a correlation between autism, highly functioning autism, so Asperger's, and the empathy, the awareness of others outside of the self. There is no weighting towards this. I'm making no value judgment about this. There are a number of very good IT companies that employ only people with Asperger's and with autism because they're very good at testing. Very interesting way of using the ability, the special abilities of these people. This is just an example for the type of tests that we use. So, one of my the ideas that I have was interesting is that, okay, this thing about test reliability, if you constantly do this test, would you get better at doing it or not? And we know that there are issues with test reliability, especially in terms of tests like Myers-Briggs, which, depending on which side of the bed you've gone out, you'll have a different answer. But also there are other tests. Interesting one is NBAC, which was actually developed at Bern, where Jasmine studied, which is a test for short-term working memory. And it's been proven that by practicing NBAC, you can improve your memory. So there are a number of NBAC apps available on iOS and on Android. I have one on my mobile phone, and I use it when I'm sitting around and don't have anything better to do, and because it helps improve my memory. So I thought, okay, now if we can do this, if we can find some kind of tests where if we work on them constantly and practice them, they will help us get better, and the things that they help us get better at are indicators of team intelligence. Could it be possible that this team will also, by doing that, become more intelligent? So let's go through and take a look at one of the interesting things. Now we're talking about teams who interact. What do teams do when they work together? Did you ever think about that? Well, Mr. McGrath did. And he analyzed all the things that teams do when they work together. They generate new ideas. They have to choose from options. They have to negotiate options. And they have to execute in coordination. Okay? So, what Woolley and her colleagues did was set up a number of tests for this in terms of teams and see how well they executed these exercises. Now this is difficult because I don't have a preview. All right, so let's wait for a second. The next slide that I think is going to come up is going to be another test. So what I would like you to do is, you can do it by yourself or you do it in groups with the people sitting next to you. You need a piece of paper and something to write with. Okay?
It's a bit more fun if you do it with the person next to you. If you do it as a group of 3, but you can also really do it by yourself.
Yeah, but this thing, these are a lot more fun if you do it in a group. So,
How do you say hi to your neighbor?
That's anxiety, okay? Remember, this is informed saying you don't have to do this, but it's going to be a lot more fun if you do it. We're going to give you 90 seconds for this because we're actually timing our so 90 seconds to do the following exercise as a group. Okay. We'd like you to come up with as many equations as possible that equal the number of 10. You can use the operators addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, parentheses. Also, you can use exponential notation if you want. That gets really difficult. You can use those as many times as you want, but you can only use the numbers between 2 and 8 once each. So let me give you the first one. 10 is 2 plus 8. You have 90 seconds time to figure out how many different combinations of these numbers come up with the number 10. Ready? Set. Go.
I do it with my teams now as well. It's very interesting, but we did it at a workshop after a bio-sharing exercise. So after we established some psychological safety in that group, it was really, really interesting how they excelled at it. Whereas teams that start off when they're new, they don't do as good. So it's really interesting to take it to your teams and do that little exercise once in a while.
Yeah. Okay. So brainstorming for new ideas is one thing that we do. Another thing is analyzing, choosing options. What you're going to see is a sample question from an IQ test. This is known as Raven's Advanced Matrices. And you'll see 8 figures, and then have to figure out which one the 9th one is. And you'll have 8 choices for that. You'll have 30 seconds time to take a look and figure out which one of the choices is the missing link. 30 seconds time, starting now. Stop. Okay. Which one do you think it is? Just to tell you, this is Raven's Advanced Matrices. Raven's Progressive Matrices is scaled up to an IQ of 138. The Advanced Matrices go on up past genius level. And research has shown that in a group, you need a scaling higher than an IQ of 138 in order to get enough challenge for the group to be able to do it. But this was just a sample. This was one of the easy ones. Okay. We're not going to be mean to you, so we're just going to explain the other ones, give you some idea of some of the other tests that we Uli and all did, and also the ones that we do. Actually, there's an easier way to do this. Since you don't have access to Raven, one of the coolest and simplest ways to do this with your team in your next retrospective. Hand out one of these, let them solve it as a team, give them 5 minutes time, and see how many numbers they get right.
And then see how they interact in the retrospective afterwards.
Yeah, see how they interact then afterwards. Okay, next thing they do is negotiating, figuring out how to work together. And what Uli and colleagues did was also research, is there any difference between co-located and virtual teams? And the way a group will interact and communicate if they have high bandwidth working together. So what they came up with was a web-based tool where the group would have a large text that they had to type into the tool together and somehow coordinate that they were not stepping over each other's edits. And this is the way, this is a screenshot from them. This is a task, this is what they had to type in. This is where they had to type in. And since they coordinate and compare between co-located and virtual teams, they had to chat through a chat window and coordinate how do we get all of this typed in without bumping each other's edits out. Very difficult thing to do. What I do with my team is another variation of this. Take a Google spreadsheet, get your team all signed into it, size it up, and do something like this. This is a Lego picture from Nathan Savaya of Jimi Hendrix, and this is the way it looks when it comes out in Google spreadsheets. Give that to your team, let them figure out how to do that. 10 minutes time. These things start to be fun. Okay, now after you've negotiated, you have to actually be able to then execute on things. One thing that they also did was let people view an image, look at a picture for 90 seconds, and then ask them questions about it. We're not going to do the exercise, so we don't have the questions. This is the image that they give us. How many animals are in here? Things like that. That's a more difficult one. An easier one, if you want to do it with your team, give them a table with random words, 90 seconds, and then let them write down as many words as they remember. Like this. Just Google for random word generator, or write me, I have these in English and in German. It's good to have then a second copy of this for scoring, which has all of this listed alphabetically. Okay. So, the last thing. Oh yeah, detection. This, now if we really wanted to be brutal, we could have them do this, but no, we're not going to. You have 90 seconds to view a grid of letters, right? And this isn't memory. This is trying to see certain patterns in them. Take a look at this and say, which is the most frequent object in this grid? So which letter comes most often, which comes least frequently, and which two objects have the most similar frequency? We'd have 90 seconds to do this. Take a look at it for a couple of seconds. Okay, so this isn't a real test, but just out of curiosity, which letter comes most often? Yes. What? S? Yes. Come on, you have 25 left. So letter that comes most often is an A. The letter that comes least is a J. And the G and the N come with equal frequency, 11 times each. I calculated that, so I didn't. But these are the type of things that we then practice with the teams. But of course, since we're psychologists, we're looking at something totally different. Of course, we never look at that, what people think we're looking at. So while they're doing all these exercises, what we're looking at is how they're talking with each other. And this is one of the greatest examples of what you can use standard deviation for. Now take a look. We have compared two groups. Each of them have a total talking time of 10 minutes. Both have a mean time of 2.5 minutes. It's like Astrums quartet. This has a standard deviation of 1.658. This is 0.354. What does this tell us? Which team has more psychological safety and which one has a more dominating alpha male? Okay. So the way to measure this scientifically, there are a number of different experimental techniques. What I do is I take a video and then I use an annotation tool like Anvil or Partitur and put it in and then note how long the individuals are speaking. It takes a while to do that. There's been a recent tool development at MIT, which I haven't been able to get a hold of the tool yet, where they actually have everybody having microphones and they can actually record and detect off the microphone. When you're doing that with virtual teams, remember that screenshot I showed you, there's a chat window, and they then do an analysis of how many words people type. So this is something that will help figure out how balanced is the team. Another thing, this gets back to what Jasmine said about group emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is an interesting concept that Daniel Goleman came up with in the 1990s. Truskov and Wolf have done a lot more work with applying, just the way that Woolley's applying individual cognitive intelligence to a team, they're applying emotional intelligence also to teams and what the characteristics of these are. And there actually are questionnaires, validated psychometric tools to take a look at that with your teams. So, but that's sort of like getting close to the end, so there are a couple of things that we'd just like to say at the end. Why don't you start?
Yes, so those exercises, as you saw, there was a lot of laughter in that room. It's actually fun to do them with the teams. And it's really interesting if you do those kind of exercises and then talk about it afterwards. So what we want to tell you in that talk is that team building is not an event thing. It's not something you do once and you don't do anywhere else. Team building is a gradual process that you can do all the time. And it doesn't really take much. It takes some little exercises to train in team building, and you can really exercise those 4 categories that we need when we want to work together as a team. Those were some examples. I'm pretty sure you can find more. And it's really fun.
And I guess last final thought from both of us as scientists is when you hear people talking about these topics, listen critically, ask yourself and ask them, if they're talking about psychology, have they actually done any training in it? Or is this something that they've just picked up as an amateur from someplace, haven't understood, and are passing half-truths along to others? Because there are a lot of people who've done research on this, and we have a couple here, and a couple more, and a couple more, and some more, and even some more. These are people who actually done serious scientific research on this, not anecdotes interviewing people, but who've done research. Okay, thank you very much for this. We hope we didn't bore you or scare you, and we're open for questions if you have any.
So we have 10 minutes left for questions. I know.
We'll switch. We'll do it one time. No questions. Anybody want to take a break earlier? Okay, thanks a lot.